Okay, good evening. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Willard Preacher podcast. As always, I'm Matt, a former Penn State student, and I'm visiting here with Gary Cattell, who is known as the Willard Preacher, a fixture on the Penn State campus, preaching the gospel for these many years. How are you, Gary?
I'm doing well. Lo, these many years.
Yes.
That's a good way of putting it.
Well, so last time we talked about a variety of things. The main topic was fornication, so sex outside of marriage or sex before marriage, and sort of talked about the um, various aspects of that. Why it's not such a great idea. What are some of the downsides? How does our culture deal with it? That led us into some discussions about uh, a Christian understanding of marriage. And then other things about our culture and pornography and other things like that. Before we kind of dive maybe back into that a little bit, I do want to talk about just sort of how we frame all of this. We're kind of having this discussion, and someone may wonder, what are these two guys doing just sitting around talking about this as a subject? But it's honest, I don't know about you, Gary, but it's not really a subject that I'm per se particularly interested in. I don't really want to know about anybody's personal life all that much, but I think what we're trying to do here is kind of frame it. In other words, if someone who's coming from our culture, who is unfamiliar with Christianity or at least not very familiar with it, and they might wonder, why does the Christian faith teach that sex is something that belongs properly in marriage? And so we're trying to frame that and explain it as opposed to just saying, well, that's just the way it is, and it's this, someone might just think it's this weird archaic viewpoint, and shouldn't we know better, and that kind of stuff. And we're just trying to lay out, where does this come from, and sort of what's the reasoning behind it, what's the proper context to it within the Christian life of really married life, and how sex sort of fits into all of that. So anyway, I just wanted to start off by kind of explaining why we're talking about this and other things. We're right now we're kind of walking through various kind of major moral issues, kind of making the Christian argument for why does the church teach these things in this way? How might we think about this as we approach it? So picking up with that from last time, that was our major topic. Is there anything you want to bring back to the forefront, or now that we've had some time to think about it, anything you want to I don't know, bring back to the conversation, Gary?
Well, we're going off what you just said. Yeah, we want to go to the culture. We want to say that this isn't just some off the wall idea that has no backing to it. We want to at least be able to say, oh yeah, God, this is what God says, and there are reasons for it. We also, and for me anyhow, we also want to say, because most churches aren't good at apologetics. They're not teaching kids as they're coming up why they believe what they believe. And I've talked to a lot of college students over the years who have basically said, well, yeah, I went to my priest or my pastor or whatever. I asked him about this, and he said, that's just the way it is. Or he gave me an answer that wasn't very good, and he said, well, that's just the way it is. Or I went to my parents, and they said, ask the pastor. And the pastor said, that's just what the faith teaches. And it wasn't good enough for them. And they just kind of walked away from the faith because they didn't think it could be defended. So, we want to be able to say to anybody who is Orthodox, especially if they're young people, even if they're parents, and their parents want some reasons to be able to tell their kids as their kids come and say, well, why should we believe this? Or kids going in high school or going off to college or in college or whatever, and they're getting it from everywhere. Go ahead and do whatever it is you want. Everything's okay. And their Christianity is saying, no, these things aren't okay. And people are saying, oh, that's just ancient stuff from a long time ago that's really irrelevant now. Doesn't really matter. And we want to be able to say, no, it is relevant. This is why we say what we say. We're not saying that we kind of figured these things out and here it is. We're saying God has said this is wrong, and we're just saying here's some reasons why it's wrong. So these things can be defended. It's up to you whether you want to think they're good defenses or not, or whether you want to believe it or not. But I guess we think these are reasonable defenses of what we believe. And that's about all we can do. We can't force anyone to believe. We can't. This isn't a 2 + 2 = 4 sort of proof, but they're just evidences. They're reasons. There's like the evidences for the existence of God. They're not proofs. They're evidences. They're signposts pointing in that direction. So what you do is you see the signposts that one side has. You look at the signposts that the other side has. You just kind of go back and forth until you see which one do you think has the better ideas. And one of the things we're trying to do is, at least I try to do on campus, is try to show the students that secularism has a lot of holes in it. It's tough to defend it. It's not as ironclad as you think when that's all you're hearing. So as I think we said before, if you went into a trial and all you heard was the prosecutor's case, you're going to think the guy's guilty every time. It's not until the defense comes up that you think, well, maybe the prosecutor's case wasn't so strong. So these kids growing up today are just hearing the prosecutor's case, basically. They're hearing it in the schools, they're hearing it in the media, social media, everywhere they go. They're not hearing anything else. So we talked about with a lady who brought out her abortion class, and it didn't seem like they had ever heard it. Heard pro-life arguments, because they're getting all of their news from secular sources, all their education from secular sources, all their social media from secular sources. Everything is secular all the time. And they've never even heard the other side. And sometimes you have to, one of the reasons we repeat some of these things more is because some of the times you have to hear these things more than once. Now, I remember when I was looking into Orthodoxy and Jimmy was telling me things, and I'd come up one day and say, well, why is that? And he'd say, I thought we already talked about this. So yeah, we did. Tell me again. Because it was so other than what I had known for however many years I'd been Christian up to that time, that, it took a while to take it in and figure out what exactly is he saying? What exactly does this mean? I had to hear many things a number of times. Plus, whenever I was going to inquirers classes, it became clear after a while that we were both, myself and whoever else was in the class and Father John, who was teaching us, we were both using the same words. We had different understandings of what those words meant. So one of the things I wanted to bring up today was something that and this kind of dovetails with that a little bit. Someone came up to me this week and he had just looked at podcast number 6. I don't remember what it was called, but it wasn't the Protestant one, but I must have talked about Protestantism again. And he's kind of a new convert to Orthodoxy from Protestantism. And he kind of felt like I was saying the Protestants don't have any spiritual experience at all. They have no relationship to Jesus at all. And I can see where he would have thought that. I didn't go back and listen to it, but I have these understandings in mind when I say things. I don't always bring them out. But we're not saying, when we're saying that, and I brought this up in Sunday school this week, when we say there is no salvation outside the church, and I gave them a number of church fathers to share that, we're not saying that everybody outside the church goes to hell. When you hear that as a Protestant, I heard this is why I would have heard it as a Protestant. When you say there's no salvation outside the church, you're saying, well, then I can't go to heaven unless I'm in the church. When we talk about salvation, remember, we're saying the path to becoming godlike. That's what salvation is. From your initial conversion to full godlikeness and resurrected body in heaven, that whole thing is salvation, because again, it comes from the fall of man. Man was created in the image and likeness of God. He fell, and he got restored into the image. We, at least in Orthodoxy, we get restored into the image the image gets restored when we're baptized, and then we grow into the likeness. But the pathway is now open for the likeness. For that, the likeness is corrupted and corroded. It's not totally extinguished, but the likeness is. The image isn't totally extinguished. The likeness is. The image gets cleaned up when you're baptized into Orthodoxy, and then you get the Holy Spirit in you, and the path is open to becoming godlike. So anyhow, what we're saying, there's a number of things we're saying before you become Orthodox, and I'm going to focus on Protestantism here, but the same is true with Catholicism. Before you're Orthodox, the Holy Spirit is outside of you. And you're following after Christ. Once you become Orthodox, Holy Spirit comes within you and you put on Christ. So we're not saying you don't have some sort of conversion experience before you're Orthodox. You do. I did. I went from sex, drugs, and rock and roll to following Jesus with all my heart. That wasn't something that came solely from my will. We're not saying you don't have any relationship with Christ. You do. You have some sort of relationship, not as much as you can have ultimately as you become godlike in orthodoxy, but you do have some sort of relationship, and you do have spiritual experiences. And this is all taken into account that God can do anything he wants. So he can make exceptions anywhere he wants. But this is the norm. This is what normally happens. And so what I tried to show my friend who had newly become Orthodox was, okay, when you get baptized in Orthodoxy, you after you come out of the water for the third time, and some of the prayers are said or whatever, some singing, you walk around the font 3 times, and you sing, "Those who've been baptized into Christ have put on Christ." Now, straight from the scriptures. So I said to him, if you had put on Christ before you became Orthodox, why did you do that? What's the point of being baptized? Is it just symbolic? Are we just kind of playing games, so to speak? We're just going through a ritual and it doesn't mean anything. And when you're chrismated, we say the Holy Spirit comes within you. Well, if the Holy Spirit was already in you before you became Orthodox, again, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make any sense. So from an Orthodox perspective, either we're just playing games and we're just saying, well, we're just running through this ritual that doesn't mean anything for you or for anybody else who's Protestant or Catholic, or these things do mean something, and there is this difference that happens. That being said, that doesn't mean there's nothing spiritual happening before that. There clearly is, but it's limited. It can only go so far. It's one of the things, and I might have said this on this podcast before, but one of the things I try to tell Sunday school, and I think I told this again, so there's a huge difference between a Mother Teresa, who most people look at as very holy, good person, and an Elder Ephraim of Arizona, or St. Paisios of Mount Athos, or St. Joseph the Hesychast, or any of these people. The difference is as far as the East is from the West. You're going to get a very, very good person, holy in the sense of being a good person in Mother Teresa, but you're going to get a much more enlightened spiritual person in an Elder Ephraim. And if you ever saw him or met him or saw him on YouTube, whatever, you can see the difference here. So there is this night and day difference, but again, it doesn't mean that nothing spiritual is happening before that. Another thing that I wanted to bring up was I was watching a talk show sort of thing, and they put on a pastor. I don't want to say the pastor's name because it was just a short clip. It was Jason Whitlock. It was just a short clip. And so I think it was in context because one of the people they had on was a follower of him, and he said it was. But one of the things that he's a Protestant pastor. One of the things he said was, well, we've lost the culture war. We're under God's judgment. So now just kind of hunker down and wait for the judgment to pass, wait for Jesus to come. There's nothing we can do. I just wanted to say that, yes, I believe we've also lost the culture war. I believe we lost it when as soon as we said homosexuals can get married. Because as we tried to say last week, I think, was that marriage is, or the family is the basic building block of society, right? So when you change the definition of family from a very basic Christian definition of one man, one woman, and children, to no 2 men or 2 women, then you've thrown away the Christian definition, and now you're in a whole different place. And that's why people were saying at the time, hey, this opens up the door for anybody to get married to anybody or anything or any animal or anything. People say, oh, no, that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous because it was Christianity that put the restraints on it. Now only society puts the restraints on it. And whereas Christianity is etched into the concrete, the society is just kind of drawn in the sand. And they can erase those boundaries anytime they want and redraw them. So it's a very different. So once you change the foundational understanding of the society, then there's no, not that there was a Christian society before that, and all of a sudden became nothing. That was the final straw, going from a Christian to kind of a secular heathen sort of society. So I agree with all that, and I agree with under God's judgment. I think it's the judgment of God just giving us over to our sin. But I don't agree that we should just then hunker down, and I don't believe because we lost it we can't get it back. Right? So in my mind, as Christians, we should always be fighting. We should always be drawing the line. We should always be saying this far and no further. We should always be pushing back. We should never run and hide. Right? Maybe there's a time, with the Antichrist or something that it's best to, not put your head above the ground too often. I don't know. But this certainly isn't the time. We still have freedom of speech. We can still get out there. We can still say things. And I always remember Jonah. God told Jonah, go to Nineveh and tell them they're going to be judged in X amount of days. And he went. And he didn't want to go because he knew of God's mercy. But he went and preached it. And they repented. And God relented the judgment. It's like 200 or 300 years later, he finally did judge them. But for that generation, for at least one or two more, he said, okay, we're not going to judge you because you've repented. And he did that for individuals in the Old Testament, to individual kings or whatever. Okay, I won't judge you in your time, or we'll lift a judgment for you, but it's coming on your sons and your daughters or whatever. So we can still turn it around, but we're not going to turn it around if we're hiding. If we're just going into our bunkers and saying, okay, we're waiting for Jesus to come. That's a defeatist attitude. As Christians, we should always be fighting. Should always be drawing the line. And just the whole Bud Light thing, when they had the Dylan Mulvaney, I think his name is, and he's a trans guy, and he's now the Bud Light poster boy or whatever he is, right? And a lot of guys drinking Bud Light. I don't know why you drink Bud Light himself. A lot of guys that drink Bud Light are like, no, we're gonna throw all this stuff away, and they've lost lots of money. So people said, no, okay, I don't care if it's over there, but when you bring it to me, I'm drawing the line. So you have to have somewhere where you're going to draw the line, somewhere where you're going to stand up and fight, somewhere where you're going to say this far and no further. But we should never, especially in this time, just run and hide.
Yeah, I think probably that the attitude of, well, let's just let it go, let's just keep to ourselves and it's not our business. That's sort of allowed us to get as far as we have, and now we're literally on the brink of we've affirmed homosexual marriage. We're totally dissolving any kind of idea of gender and sexual identity. And now we're moving ever steadily, ever more steadily towards acceptance of pedophilia and things of that nature,
right.
And someone who's not really abreast of some of this stuff might say, oh, that's too far, no one would ever go for that. But what's to stop us? And if we're just gonna say, let's hide, then it's just gonna keep marching in that direction.
Yeah, we always have to remember that secularism is an anti-Christian philosophy, and they're going to keep pushing it. And if people say, oh, that's too far, what we mean is, at this point anyhow, what we mean is they're going to lower the age of consent, right? So instead of calling it pedophilia, they call it minor attracted persons. That's always the first step.
Yeah.
To change to how you identify,
how you talk about
the behavior. Yeah. So but people thought, oh, homosexuality never be accepted. Homosexual marriage never. I always thought it was strange that we accepted homosexual adoption before we accepted homosexual marriage. I thought that was a little backwards, but maybe that's just what they thought they could get, and they got it. So this is, the left, the secular left in America. It's very smart. They're kind of like the Chinese. They play the long game, right? China plays the long game. We tend to play the short game, and so. And their favorite thing is to say, "Oh, that's a slippery slope fallacy." No, it's not a fallacy. It's their game plan, right? So they start out a little bit, whatever they think they can get, and people say, "All right, whatever, they can have that. At least that's not too bad." Once they have that, then they push it a little bit further, a little bit further, and a little bit further. So they didn't start out with homosexual marriage. They started out with, we just want to be left alone in our own bedroom.
Mhm.
We don't want the government looking into our bedroom. We want to be able to do what we want to do in the privacy of our own home or whatever. That's where they started. And people, oh, well, that's reasonable. And they just build on that and build on that and build on that. And each time, since we got used to the first one, we think the second one, well, okay, if they would have started out with the second or the third or the fourth one, people would have pushed back. But each time you get used to the one, and then they just put it ahead a little bit more, and then you get used to that, and they put it ahead a little bit more. They put out these little feelers. Oh, mine are attractive persons. It's not going to happen today, but they've got those little feelers out there, and they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we just keep letting them and letting them and letting them. And I remember that at least the conservative political commentators all used to say, I don't know if they say it anymore, but they used to say, well, that's just college thing. Those are college kids, they're all idealistic. When they get out into the real world, they'll realize this stuff doesn't work, and they'll come back to reality. They'll change and come back to reality. What they really did was change the culture. They didn't change. Some of them probably changed and came back to reality, but enough of them got into the corporations and the media and the school system to change the culture. And the conservative political ones are always concerned about the presidency and the Congress. And that's nice, and you need that. But if you don't have the schools, and you don't have the media, and you don't have the various institutions in America, it really doesn't matter that you've got those other things, because eventually you won't have them for a while anyhow. And people are growing up being taught these things and knowing these things and seeing these things, and they're now starting to take their place in society. World War II generations out, baby boomers are going out, Generation X is next. I mean, eventually you're going to get to these people that have learned this their whole life.
Right.
And, it's changed now. Just wait till they get in. So, yeah, it's always, you never, ever, ever, ever give up. You always fight, to your dying breath. You stand and you don't give up, and you fight.
Yeah. And you witness to the truth. That's
right. Whenever it comes to you, you don't have to go looking for it necessarily. But when it comes to you, you have to be ready for it. And that's one of the things we're trying to do here, saying, okay, when this comes to you, whether it's through your kids or through your neighbors or through your school district or forever, you need to be up on these things so that you can say, no, we're not giving in again. Get tired of, we as Christians, no matter what persuasion we are, giving in and giving in and giving in and giving in.
Right.
Oh, you don't have to worry about that. That's just the culture. We just take care of ourselves, let them do what they want. Well, that's why they have your kids now. That's why your kids aren't Christians now, because you gave them over to the culture. And the culture has now educated them, because you allowed the culture to run amok without any sort of, this is wrong, this is why it's wrong. And your kids are much more persuaded by the culture most of the time than they are about the few minutes they're spending at home at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked specifically then last week, of course, about the topic of sex and outside of marriage and all that. Took me a little while to post the video, but now that we have, one fella, I suppose, he put up a couple of comments. So would you like to sort of use that as a segue into our next discussion?
Maybe yeah, sure.
Mention
what anybody else out there that wants to comment, we can. I replied to him, but he replied again, but we can you throw something out there, and we can talk about it or whatever. So it's kind of your way of getting your ideas out there.
That's right, and it's really nice. It's nice that he's used that format, and then we can also we can discuss, maybe respond to it, and if he likes or doesn't like that response, then he can comment again, and we can continue this discussion. That's kind of what we're after. So okay, so here's his comment. Of course, we were talking about all sorts of things, but here's what his comment is, and I'll probably, like I mentioned to you earlier, Gary, I'll probably put a screenshot up of this, but let me just read it, and then we can discuss. So he says, So you're supposed to live a sexless life until you finally get married at 40. What a joke. People are not designed to wait that long. This isn't the ancient Near East. We do not live in an agrarian society where arranged marriage is the norm and people are married by 16. Statistically, most people nowadays don't get married until they are well into their 30s, because that's how long it takes to find a willing partner and to be financially stable enough to support a family. We no longer live in a society where you can work an entry-level job right out of high school and support a family on one income. So that was his first comment. Would you like to respond to that, Gary?
Why don't you read it? Why don't you read everything, and then I'll respond after you've read it. My response and then his response.
Okay. So then you briefly responded to his comment by saying, is it that those of us who aren't married can't exercise self-control, or is it that we don't want to? And so his response to that, I guess a few hours later, was, were people designed to wait until they're in their mid-30s? Question. If so, why did people in the ancient Near East, where the Bible was written, not have to wait that long? And why does sexual maturity, and with it the sexual drive, happen in the early to mid-teen years? Do you propose we bring back arranged marriages for 16-year-olds? How do you intend to change society so drastically in one lifetime?
Well, first of all, their lifespans were much shorter back then, so they really didn't have much choice but to get married early. Secondly, he's right. You do come to sexual maturity earlier than 30 or 40. And we certainly have kind of I think, a messed up society in that people are waiting that long. And even though the society waits that long, you don't have to wait that long. But still, the question that I put to him, which he didn't answer, was what happens to self-control? If you can have self-control in your teen years until you're in your 20s, then you can have it in your 20s. And if you can have it in your 20s, you can have it in your 30s. You can have it in your 30s, you can have it in your 40s. Monastics never get married. There's others. It's not many, but there are those in society that never get married, right? And in Christianity, you're expected to stay celibate. So all those young college students, all those college males walking around with all those women on college campuses, at least on Penn State, with their shirts on all buttoned and everything, all the pornography going around, they're expected to stay celibate and not have sex and again, parents, if you have young children around, this would be a good time to pause it, because we are going to get into things that you may not want them to hear. So pause it here and probably keep it paused until you get them out of the room. But anyhow, you're expected to stay celibate, you're expected not to masturbate. Those two things are considered. You're supposed to exercise self-control. And everybody can do that. Nobody's below doing that. That does take some practice, maybe. I think it probably takes Jesus. If you don't have Jesus, maybe it's going to be a lot more difficult for you. Although I think you can do it. It is part of our nature to be able to do it. It's much easier if you have Jesus. Plus, never in the history of the world has sex been needed to have a good life. You don't have to have sex to have a good life. You need to have sex to have children. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to have sex to have a good life. You can leave sex out of your life and have a perfectly good life. Nobody ever got a sexual disease. Let's put it this way, nobody ever died from not having sex. Mm-hmm. Nobody spontaneously combusted because they didn't have sex. People have died because they have had sex. A lot of babies die because somebody had sex. But nobody's died or gotten a disease because they didn't have sex. Right? So sex is not necessary for a good life. And you do have self-control. Now, you may not want to exercise it. If you're not a Christian, you may not know why you should exercise it. So no, I'm not trying to change society. That would be nice. I'm just saying you as an individual, you have self-control and you can exercise it if you want. Mm-hmm. And if you come to Jesus, he can help you exercise it. Right. But first you have to understand, going back to the fornicating one, which we'll actually have to go back to when we hit homosexuality. You have to know why this is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we're putting it off. One of the reasons we're putting it off is because we can just have sex whenever we want. We have birth control, we have abortion, we have cures for a lot of sexual diseases, not all of them. So there's this kind of thing in society, well, sex between anybody, anytime, anywhere, and for any reason is okay. So why get married?
Right.
Well, why restrict yourself to that? And do you really, he says, you can't just get right out of high school and get married on one income. Well, you can. It's just how do you want to live?
Hmm.
We have these unrealistic expectations as the type of place we want to live in and all the amenities we want to have. But yeah, you can do that. It is possible. It's just that we don't want to. So
Right. No, and certainly, I mean, the way what he is describing is, you know, it we'll take his word for it that people are getting married later and later, but that's not on account of people, living a celibate life. And it's for all the reasons you described, right? They're not already not seeing the point of being married. They're already have ready access to sex, because it's just so pervasive. And yeah, and every other sort of priority except for marriage and family life, you know. Um, so then to say, well, people are getting married later and later, yeah, that's not healthy either. That's not such
no,
a great thing either, because we're putting all these things in front of we're prioritizing all these things before something very fundamental, which is uh, a healthy salvific married life, you know career and stuff and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
and that's the thing that a lot of people, and we mentioned last week, and that's the thing a lot of people who aren't Christian, especially Orthodox Christian, but any sort of Christian, don't understand that the marriage is primarily, first and foremost, for your salvation. So you have the monasteries and you have marriage.
Right.
You're not really expected to stay single all your life. You can,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really expected, because you're expected to be in some sort of close relationship to work out all those kinks, to get all that sin out. You got to do that in relationships. And the monastics do it in those sorts of relationships, and the married couple does it in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important too. And and kids are being put off to the side. Kids are secondary thought. It's all about, we'll get into this again in a minute, but there's all about pleasure and so on, and closeness, and not about having kids. And so kids are getting in the way, because we need that nicer stuff that we can't have if we have too many kids, because they'll take too much money away from the stuff that we want to do, too much time in the way we want to do. So we become very selfish and self-centered, and kids are an afterthought. And even once we have kids, we kind of shop them off to daycare, let somebody else, because we need to get back to our job, because we need to make the money, because we have to have the stuff. Right. So it's all about us. It's very selfish, self-centered society.
Right.
And our understanding of sex is so convoluted. So if you can have all the benefits of the married relationship without being married, then why get married?
Mm-hmm.
That's the main reason I think it's being put off, not because you don't have enough money, not because of any of these other reasons, because you got all those benefits now. You got all the sex you want now if you find somebody who's willing to have it with you, right? So why get married? Why tie yourself down? If this doesn't work, you go on to the next one. Use up all that until you're tired of it and you get older, and then get married. It's a very convoluted, screwed up way of looking at things.
That's right.
But it's the secular way of looking at things, and that's mostly convoluted and screwed
Yeah,
up.
that's why it's so convoluted and scary. Yeah. And of course, maybe as a final comment about this, within the church, it's not just that, since we were talking about sex within the context of marriage, even within the church, we fast from food in certain periods of time, and along with that, we fast from sexual relations. We limit that, and um, St. Paul says to refrain from that for a time, and so the idea is that even within marriage, there's moderation and self-control, not because food or because sex are these awful things. They're healthy things, but again, we're continuing to exercise self-control, and in that sense, as married people, we kind of are showing our support. We're spiritually engaging in self-control in the same way that we would ask someone who's not married to also be exercising self-control to draw closer to God and for everyone's salvation, so
In some ways, it's more difficult when you're married, because the person's right there
mm-hmm.
and it's, legal, so to speak.
Right.
And you're seeing them in all forms of dress and undress and everything. And you're still expected, like from, like 40 days or however many, 47 or 54, or whatever it is, ends up being for Lent, and 40 days for the Christmas fast. And someone said to me the other day that, I haven't checked this out, but they were saying in Orthodox we fast half the year,
Mm-hmm.
all told. So yeah, we're expected to use self-control even within marriage, like you said, food, sex, whatever. So because it's part of becoming godlike,
Mm-hmm.
controlling the passions. So those passions, and I've always said, whether this is true or not, what I've always said, if you can control your desire for sex and for food, you can pretty much control your desire for virtually anything. Because those are the two, they're going to, at least for guys, those are the two that scream at you the loudest.
Right.
Maybe it's different for women. I don't know. I've never been a woman,
mm-hmm.
but as for guys, at least those are two desires that scream at you the loudest. And even when you're married and you're not in the fasting time, there's time when the woman's in having her period or whatever, and or the spouse isn't really is tired, isn't really up for it or whatever. So there's self-control to be exercised everywhere. But society doesn't see that. Secular society, self-control is like it's not even on the radar.
No,
it's anathema. It's something that they don't care to exercise for the most part.
No, and if you think about how we talk about it, we talk about sex as a need, and we talk about sex drive and all that kind of stuff, and it's just okay. It's a biological. It's something going on biological, but it's not something that you can exercise no control over.
No, but it goes back to evolution. It goes back to this idea that we're just animals. So we have a sex drive like the dog has a sex drive or whatever. And we're as helpless to control it as the dog is, because we're no different than them. But then, as we talked about a while ago, if we're not created in the image of God and we're no different than the brontosaurus or whatever, then what worth do we have? What value do we have more than a cockroach? If they're not in the image of God and we're not in the image of God, then we can make stuff up and give ourselves value because it makes us feel good, but we really, ostensibly don't have any value any more than any other being on the planet does. That's what a lot of young people now are kind of struggling with. What gives me value? Not just why do I exist, but what gives me value? On college campuses, oh, you got this value, you got value, you got value, you got value, you got value, but you really don't if you're not created in the image of God. And they're trying to assure these young people that they have value because, that age group, whatever it is, college students, a little bit above college students now and down, that's the age group of mental illness. Because they're the ones that and it's not going to get any better with the next generation. So they don't have this understanding that they are valuable just by being human, because they're created in the image of God. And they don't have an understanding of even why they exist. And they're just given all this stuff that some of it may make sense to them, some of it may not. But they are the mental illness generation. Secularism will do that to you. So it's a generator of mental illnesses.
Yep. Well, so we've talked sort of about this idea then about our society, our secular culture's idea of really viewing sex as being all about pleasure. And that sort of as the orienting factor with all of these discussions. So we're going to turn our attention now to the question of homosexuality, which, we can talk about a variety of things related to this. It's perhaps a little bit more complicated than what we've talked about before. But let's turn our attention to that and kind of talk about the Christian view of homosexuality and some ideas attached to that.
And again, if you're a parent and there's kids around, now's a good time to pause it, because we're getting into, because homosexuality, it kind of dovetails on fornicating and transgender. So a lot of the things that were true for those two are going to be true for this.
Mhm.
So as you were saying, if you believe that sex is for pleasure, then why not engage in homosexuality or any sort of sex anywhere, anytime with anybody for any reason? Don't even have to be human. This is
Mhm.
just for pleasure. You'll have absolutely no understanding why it should be restricted to marriage between a man and a woman, as long as you believe it's for pleasure, or even for getting close to the person. If it's for getting close to the person, same thing. As we said last time, and the same is true for homosexuality. And what you see these days, like on a college campus, they're kind of put creation of life off to the side. But if you really question them, what they're going to do is they're going to see each one of those three things as equal. Purpose of sex is pleasure. Purpose of sex is getting close to your mate. Purpose of sex is creation of life. And they're all the purpose of sex, and they're all equal. And so you can put the creation of life off and just go out on a Friday or Saturday night. If you happen to hook up with somebody, great, you can have it for pleasure. Or if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you want to get closer to them, then you can do it for that reason. And creation of life doesn't have to be anywhere in the picture.
Mhm.
And as we were saying last time, in case you missed it, or like me and have to hear things a few times, once you untether pleasure and closeness from the creation of life, they become absurd. Because as we said last time, if you're saying sex is for pleasure, it has no connection to the creation of life at all, then it should be okay to have sex with anybody whom the society says it's okay to have a pleasurable experience with. Because there's nothing tethering it to anything. There's nothing restricting it. It's just a pleasurable experience, like you would have with your parents or your siblings or your children or the married couple down the street or your pet or the creation or the amusement park. Whatever it is, if it's a pleasurable experience, then you can use sex in that pleasurable experience. Same with getting close to somebody. If it's not tethered, if it's not restricted by the creation of life, then you should be able to do it with anybody the society says it's okay to get close to. All the same, maybe not the amusement park, but at least pets and children and siblings and parents and old lady, old man down the street, married couple down the street. It doesn't matter because you're getting close to them. And that's why you see all this runaway sexuality in society, because there's nothing restricting it. There's nothing tethering it. Once you realize that sex is for the creation of life, because the man has a penis and sperm, because the woman has a vagina and egg, because the only opening on the male or female body, the only opening in the world in which a male penis is supposed to go, is created to go, is the vagina, which has an egg. Penis goes in there, the sperm ejaculates. When that sperm ejaculates, the only thing it wants to do is fertilize an egg. So no matter, as we said last time, no matter where you ejaculate that sperm, anywhere in the world, the only thing it wants to do is fertilize an egg. No matter what you put in the vagina, whatever it is, that egg in there, it's just waiting for the sperm, and that's it. Right? Because that's the purpose of the whole thing, is to create life, have family. And once you realize that, or once you admit that, I think everybody somewhere knows that. Once you admit that, now how does homosexuality make sense? How does fornicating make sense? What need do you have of abortion if you're not fornicating? But since we're talking about homosexuality, well, how does homosexuality make sense if the purpose of sex is to create life? Right? Doesn't make any sense at all. You can't do it. There's nothing in that relationship that's going to allow you to create life. So the homosexual, going on to the second point, the homosexual point that they've always made is that this isn't just a choice. We were born this way. This is who we are. And they'll say, just as you were born heterosexual, we're born homosexual. And just as you can't change you being heterosexual, which I don't believe for a second, but this is their thing, we can't change being homosexual. This is the way we're born, right? Now, first of all, this is where the relationship to transgender comes in. Remember, with the transgender, we said physical reality versus thoughts and feelings. Physical reality can't be wrong. Thoughts and feelings can be and are oftentimes wrong. So if those two conflict, physical reality is always what the truth is. The physical reality here is everybody has a heterosexual sex organ. If you have a sex organ, it's heterosexual. I tell them on campus, if you can show me a homosexual sex organ, then maybe you can convince me that you're born homosexual. If you can't show me a homosexual sex organ, if you're just showing me a penis ejaculating sperm or vagina with an egg in it, those are both heterosexual by nature. And so you are by nature heterosexual. Everybody is. What's happening with a homosexual is the same as happening with a transgender. Their thoughts and feelings are conflicting with the physical reality of their body. And they're saying, well, my thoughts and feelings tell me I'm homosexual, so I'm homosexual. Now, those thoughts and feelings aren't always right. They have to be, you have to put them up against something. You have to have some truth to put them up against, to see if they're right. Obviously, the best one is God and the real God and the God-man Jesus, because he can tell you for sure. Since you most don't have that these days, well, then you put it up against the physical reality of your body.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the truth is. That's where you should be conforming your thoughts and feelings. And so the two are very much interrelated, right? And what we're doing is we're making these special exceptions. Everywhere else, thoughts and feelings conflict with physical reality. In the whole scientific world, if thoughts and feelings conflict with physical reality, they change. So ideally, they change their thoughts and feelings to conform to physical reality. With transgender and homosexuality, no, we have to change. We have to change physical reality. We have to ignore it. We have to say, no, that's not where the truth lies. Mm-hmm. Truth lies with your thoughts and feelings. But let's just say, for argument's sake, you are born homosexual. How does that make it right necessarily? Right? Because I don't know if they do this anymore, but through most of my lifetime, they said that people are born alcoholics. And they said, when you take that first drink, you're doomed because that's how you were born. You have something in you that every time you take that first drink, you can't stop until you're falling down drunk. The only thing you can do is never drink again. Again, I don't believe this either, but this is how the society says. So if you're saying that you can be born an alcoholic, and even though you're born an alcoholic, alcoholism is still wrong, then you're turning around and saying, because you're born homosexual, that has to be right. There's a conflict there. You either have to say it has to be right to be an alcoholic because you're born that way, or you have to say it's not necessarily right to be homosexual, even if you're born that way. Mm-hmm. But very rarely do they get called on this, especially not, the media is never going to do it. And Christians will do it, but very rarely are they going to do it. I mean, I know psychologists and psychiatrists and whomever, which I don't trust much anymore anyhow, but they've gone back and forth for years saying that people born psychopaths are sociopaths, right? Well, again, it's the same thing. If you believe that, or if that's true, then you have the same problem. Either being a psychopath or a sociopath is good because you're born that way, because homosexuality is good because you're born that way, or it's wrong even though you're born that way, and you can't say homosexuality is right even though you're born that way. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that they really have going for them is the idea that they're born that way, and it falls apart at every way you look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The idea, and I would argue, in my mind, we've talked about, fornicating heterosexual stuff, and no one really, the gentleman responded, but he wasn't saying, his argument when we were saying that, fornicating is a problem, wasn't to say, but that's who I am. I was born this way or something like this. That's sort of that rhetorical twist that gets added on with this particular issue is, this is not just an element of my life. This is not just some quality that I have. It's I was born this way, and it is who I am. Like, it's a total identity. And so, then which again, that's our culture's, that is our culture kind of making this argument that's trying, again, that doesn't make sense either, but it's an argument that is thrown out there so that we'll put anyone who opposes it on their heels a bit, simply because, I don't, so if we're disagreeing with this, then we are fundamentally despising this person at their core of their existence, rather than just, this
Right.
is an element of them. There are, we just got finished talking about self-control. There are things that, why is self-control so important? Because we live in this fallen world. We're all a bit screwed up. We all have impulses that are not good. And so we need to deal with that, and by cleaning up those things, we can draw closer to God. So the argument of like, well, this is how I was born, and furthermore, this is the root of my identity. This is who I am so completely. Boy, that's a terrible thing to say, that that's your identity, simply because you know some, you might like it, you might not like it, but we're all a lot more than just our sexual inclinations.
Yeah, and they used to try not to do this anymore. I don't really get into a lot of debates with homosexuals anymore. Once homosexual marriage was
Mm-hmm.
legalized, because they realized they got everything they need and they don't have to do it anymore. They used to piggyback the civil rights uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, movement, just for the very reason you said. Well, just as somebody who's black can't change that, if you say you're somehow bad for being black or something like that, well, that's a
Mm-hmm.
horrible thing, because it's a skin color. They can't change it. They haven't. That's the point. They haven't done anything. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. It's not their actions, their behavior, right? With homosexuality, it's an action or behavior. So they had to get it out of that realm, as you were saying, and say, no, this isn't just an action or behavior. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say I'm wrong, it's like you're racist against somebody who's black or something other than white or whatever. And that does intimidate people.
Mm-hmm.
At least they used to. Again, I don't know if they
Mm-hmm.
need to make that argument anymore, but at least they used to. The other thing that they say is, or they used to say is, well, we love each other. And
Mm-hmm.
just as you love, your wife or your girlfriend or your whatever boyfriend or your husband or whatever, we love each other. And just as, the natural kind of outworking of that is sexual thing, well, so it is with us. But the problem with that is, what if you have a 30-year-old man and having sex with his 60-year-old mother,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying, oh, yuck. They're saying, no, it's not yucky. We love each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is that any different than somebody saying, oh, you're having sex with the same sex, that's yucky? No, we love each other. They say, oh, well, you could have babies and they can become deformed. Well, number one, 60-year-old mother's probably not having babies anymore. If she does, you've got abortion, you've got birth control. It's not like you have to bring that baby into the world if you don't want to in the secular world. So why isn't it the same thing? Or the guy with his father, or the girl with her father, or the girl with her mother, or brothers and sisters. If loving each other justifies having sex, then you're going down a road that even most homosexuals don't want to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So none of these things ultimately make sense, which is why they bring in the cancel Gestapo,
Mm-hmm.
which is why they tied it to the civil rights movement. So, okay, well, you can't really justify the behavior, so we'll say it's who we are, and we'll say we love each other just like you love each other. And they may have the same love being infatuation. They may have those same infatuated feelings, right? But that doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go beyond that, and they can't go beyond that. So once they lose the argument on this is who we are, because they have heterosexual sex organs, and the difference between the civil rights movement and homosexual movement is behavior versus skin color.
Mm-hmm.
Something you can change, or at least don't have to act upon, and something you have no ability to change. Then there's that one too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but most people are pretty much convinced on homosexuality. I think most college students are pretty much aren't going to go against homosexuality. They're not fully convinced on trans thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty much fully convinced on homosexuality.
Yeah.
But they've never heard the other side. They've only heard the one side. And when you only hear the one side, like if somebody comes to me and I give them the other side, just like we did here, is it really going to penetrate?
Mm-hmm.
20 years of hearing one side, and then you hear the other side once,
Mm-hmm.
then you walk away and you hear the side you've heard for 20 years all over again?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the necessity of the Christians fighting for the culture.
Mhm.
Because that's why it doesn't make any sense, because they've been trained to think this way.
Right. Right. And and I think what we would say in a broad way is simply that, if someone, you would hear I'm sure all these kinds of arguments maybe a bit more 10 or 15 years ago. But the type of argument of like, this is who I am. It's, I knew I was gay since, you know, I was a little kid and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I think we would just say that we all bear different crosses. We all have different difficult things that we uh, encounter in life, and that really the priority then is knowing God, knowing truth, drawing close to God. And I don't think there's any question that if someone was felt inclined to live that way, and then out of love for God strove to live a pure life, that's a martyrdom in and of itself. That is a true spiritual feat, and God recognizes that. And so I think for us, with any of these things that we're talking about, really the priority is it's the spiritual life. All these other things sort of attached to it makes sense in light of that. But yeah, like you said, it's hard because our secular culture is putting all of these incoherent ideas together, but they have the power of just the constant message, so rewiring that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I used to hear, well, I knew I was homosexual from the age of 5. If you knew you're homosexual from the age of 5, something happened to you that was messed up, because you shouldn't even known about sex at the age of 5 or the age of 8. All these things. Oh yeah, I knew at this early age. Well, how did you know about sex at that early age? Your mind is not able to conceive of that in a proper way at that age.
Right.
And if somehow you did, well, that something happened that was not good for you, right? And that probably is what skewed you. But no matter what it was, like you said before, it doesn't matter, because not all our desires and thoughts and so on are right. But God allows us to fight these fights, and it's not just homosexuals that have to fight them. Everybody has to fight something. And you may have to fight it your entire life. And, because for whatever reason, God allows that in your life to humble you. Maybe you haven't gotten to the place where he can deliver you from it. Maybe he just wants to reward you at the end for fighting the good fight. Whatever it is, if it's wrong, it's a wrong desire, you have to fight it. And of course, it's easier in orthodoxy because you have all these ways of doing it. But nonetheless, that's what you're expected to do. So I've heard people say before, well, I fought it and I fought it. Wasn't going away, so I just gave in. Right? You lost. Like we said before, there's no excuse for not fighting. Not just the culture, but your inner desires. There's no excuse for not fighting. There's no excuse for giving in. There's no excuse for saying, well, I can't do this anymore. Especially if you're Christian, especially if you're Orthodox. God will always give you the strength to do what he calls you to do. If he calls you to fight this fight, he will give you the strength to do it. Most people say, and most priests will say, when people go to confession, they're pretty much confessing a lot of the same things over and over again. Why? Because they're still fighting this battle that God is allowing to still rage in them. Maybe it's gotten less over time, but it's still there, and it still is affecting them. And anytime you have to go through something like that, you like you said, it's like a martyrdom or whatever. You have to go through something like that. If God is allowing you to go through it, it's because it's for your good. And he ultimately will reward you for that in the end, if you don't give up. If you fall and you get back up, that's fine. But if you fall and you stay falling, then that's not fine. Or if you say, well, I'm going to fall because I can get back up, that's not fine. But if your desire is to overcome it, and a lot of times what gets in the way is our pride. Because we think, oh, we can beat this on our own. And God has to allow us to get beaten down and fall and fall and fall and fall before we're finally going to say, no, I really can't beat this on my own. I need help. And that's really when you begin to gain that humility, which is extremely difficult. And some of us never get there, but when you start to get that humility, then you start to get some victories, because God can now come in and help you. But as long as you're thinking, I can do this myself, I'm going to fight this on my own. Yeah, he may relieve you of it to some degree, but eventually he has to allow you to fall, because you have to learn that no, this is beyond your ability. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. It now, as we sort of head towards wrapping this topic up for tonight, how do you handle, let's say, an argument? Because one side of this argument is sort of the person responding and kind of arguing backwards, saying, look, married people engage in sex for pleasure. Not every married person has children. Not every married person is trying to have children, right? And so they say, so why is it so wrong for me to, why is it so wrong then for the homosexual person to engage in sex with those sorts of aims in mind? How do you deal with that sort of backwards argument?
Well, I think first of all, I think yes, you can have sex for pleasure when you're married. It's probably not the best motivation. Your motivation, because it's too crass, it's too shallow. Your motivation should be to get closer to your husband or wife. That should be your motivation, right? And they say, well, why can't we get close to each other? Well, number one, you don't have the presuppositions. God created Adam, and then he took Eve from Adam. Now they're coming back together. So that's why you can have that wholeness when you come back together, or that real union when you come back together. Adam and Eve don't have that. But secondly, it goes back to the argument from before. Okay, well, if we're not going to tether this to the creation of life, then it's not just homosexuality, it's anything. Right? So are you willing to say it's okay for the son to have sex with his mother, or a person to have sex with their pet, or whatever? Because all that comes into play as soon as you untether it, because there's no restraints to it. So you have to have the right presuppositions. You have to have, this is what it's for. It's for the creation of life. And so, yes, married couple can go and have sex just for pleasure. It's not the best motivation, but they have it tethered to the creation of life. And we really shouldn't be using birth control, right? So so even if you say, okay, we want it for pleasure, there's still that possibility that you're going to create life. What possibility is there for homosexuals to create life? It's not, and even if you do it during a time when you can't create life, we're still in a relationship where life can be created. And so the first step is to say to homosexual, what is sex for? And if they can't admit it's for the creation of life, then you're never going to convince them. Right. Because if it's not for the creation of life, if that's not the overall reason. Now you can purpose to have sex to get close to your wife when she's not fertile, right? You don't have to restrict sex only to those few days when she can get pregnant. So you can have a purpose of having sex with her or with your husband or wife to get and stay close to each other. But that's not the overall reason. It's not the big reason. That's not the reason why it is. It's like a secondary, yes, you're purposing to do that, but the overall reason is to create life, and you're in that relationship so you can do that. But you want to keep that relationship so the family can have the best chance possible to survive. So society, because the family is the basic building block of society. Family breaks down, society breaks down. Plus, remember, you're imaging Christ, and you're coming into the primary purpose of marriage is to come into the likeness of God. Well, you're starting out at a wrong place if you're starting homosexuality, because you're starting out with sin. So right there, it's negated. So the primary purpose, coming into the image of God, is negated because you can't do that through sin. Secondary thing of creation of life is negated because you can't create life. And the third one is you're never going to be whole with your mate because you're putting two plugs or two sockets together, right? That's not going to work. Two Adams and two Eves. Adam wasn't taken from, Steve wasn't taken from Adam, right? Eve was taken from Adam. So now they can come back together and they can be that one. They can become one. You can't have that outside of that. So on every level, homosexuality fails. And just as in transgenderism is a mental illness because they're not dealing well with physical reality. Same thing is true with homosexuality. It used to be considered a mental illness by psychologists and psychiatrists and so on. But it is because their physical body is telling them one thing and they're thinking something else, and they're denying the physical reality of their body. And you can say, and you could be right about this, that we all have mental illnesses to a degree, right? And until we are godlike, until we're seeing things the way they actually are, none of us are seeing things the way they really are completely, right? But this is a major one because it's your own body you're not seeing correctly, right? It's not, you just don't understand what birds are correctly or something like that. You don't have a full understanding of what a bird is, and a full understanding of the inner essence of a flower or something like that. You have to have a pretty high spiritual state to know. This is your own body, right? And you're denying what it is. That's a problem, right? So I would say to anybody who has this, has these beliefs, homosexuality is sin like any other sin, on the one hand. On the other hand, you could say it's the same as fornicating because they're both sins. But I think homosexuality is more of a perversion. It's more of a perversion of your thought life and the way you see things. It's harder to recover from. But you can recover from it because you can come to God. He can save you, hopefully in the Orthodox Church. He can put you on that road to godlikeness. He can give you everything you need to straighten those thoughts and feelings out. If you don't give up, you can at the very least control them, and they should over time. It may take a long time, but they should over time lessen, right? So there's always hope. There's only hope in Jesus. One of the things I was trying to tell Sunday school, which is just an aside, but it's the last Sunday school of the year, and there's a couple of seniors in the class. So I always like to give the seniors a bit of a send off, warn them about, not giving them a cake or anything, but warning them about secularism and ecumenism and so on. And I lost where I was going with that. But we do a lot of apologetics, right? And just like we're doing here, and that is a realm of truth. But ultimately, truth is a person. If all Christianity is for you is a system of propositions, this proposition and that proposition, this proposition, that's not going to be enough ultimately. We're not going to make it with that. You have to get past that, and you have to get to the relationship, right? This brings up one more thing I was thinking about talking about today, if we still have a couple of minutes.
Sure, yep.
Somebody sent me one of those little videos of 1 minute shorts or whatever on Facebook, and it was an evangelist talking to an atheist. The atheist says, I need proof. Proof that God exists, 2 + 2 = 4 sort of proof. The evangelist was saying, well, good luck with that, because you don't have that with virtually anything, right? You don't, if you have this is college students, so if you have a girlfriend, you don't have 2 + 2 = 4 assurance she's not going to cheat on you or leave you. You get in your car to drive somewhere, you don't have 2 + 2 assurance = 4 assurance that you're not going to wreck and kill yourself and be killed or whatever. You have that very rarely in life, if at all, except for maybe in mathematics, and maybe there's something else. So you're treating this on a level different than you're treating everything else. The atheists seem to be mollified by that. But I've seen other atheists that I think are more in line with what's going on here say, look, that's not good enough, because you're asking me to dedicate my entire life to this being. And, once I admit that he exists, now I've got a responsibility to find out who he is. Then I have a responsibility to do what he says. And that's my entire life I'm giving to this. Even though I'm doing other things, this is going to be everything. And I can't do that just with a beyond a reasonable doubt sort of argument. And I think that that's true. You have to go beyond that. God has to open up your spiritual understanding to know, and you have to go on to the relationship. And that's when you really become Christian.
Did that pastor, did he take it to that next step? Or did he?
Well, it was only 1 minute short, so they just cut off there. So I don't know if he did or didn't. Hopefully he did. The atheists seem to be okay with that. But a lot of times what happens is when you do what we're doing here, what I do on
Mhm.
campus. It's a lot of apologetics. And it's very easy to reduce the faith to these sort of quote proofs or evidences of
Mhm.
this proposition and that proposition. And Jesus gets reduced to a proposition. Holy Trinity gets reduced to a proposition, a concept.
Mhm.
And if you're in apologetics, that's what we were doing in Sunday school. Some of the kids in Sunday school are homeschooled and they're doing this in their homeschool too. And it's very good, but you can't let it skew you into thinking that everything's a proposition. It's the
Right.
Trinity is a relationship.
Mhm.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The core, it's a relationship of love. That doesn't mean that I know the essence of God or anything, but with what we know, that's
Mhm.
what it is.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're entering into. So we always have to make sure that it's relationship, a being that we've had some experience with and that we're in relationship with, and hopefully getting to a place. And that's the purifying process in Orthodoxy,
Mhm.
purifying your passions so that God is more opened up to you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you can say to someone, look, this thing in your life, whatever it is, if it's sin, then it's worth giving up. It's not just so that, you've won the argument and you check that box or you agree to these five things. It's like, no, what is offered is encountering the eternal God directly in relationship. And so what higher thing could there be? That's what's offered. That's why it's worth, whatever amount of struggle. That's why it's worth, you know, getting rid of the old man, so to speak, and getting over these things. Because yeah, that relationship is so it's so healing, it's so nourishing and fulfilling in every way. So
Yeah, and Jesus says, it's our sin that separates us from God. And a lot of times we see that, and especially in the evangelistic world, evangelism world, you see that as, the non-believer, his sin is separating from God. And when that's forgiven, then he can come to that relationship with God. And that's true. But even once you're a Christian, whatever sin or passions or desires or intentions or motivations or thought processes that you have that is still not godlike, you are to one degree or another still separated from God.
mhm.
That's the whole process of becoming godlike. The more godlike you become, the more God is open to you, the closer the relationship is, the more gifts you get from God, so spiritual gifts you get from God, and so on. The
Mhm.
first step is purification.
Mhm.
That's the first
Mhm.
step. Theosis or godlikeness being the final step, and some manner of illumination in between there. So that's the whole process of getting close to God. And again, stump for Orthodoxy, we have saints that have gotten there as much as you can. But
Mhm.
one of the things we used to wonder about, we used to put it this way when I was Protestant, where's the glory? We look at the early church, where's that glory? Where is it?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, it wasn't until I became Orthodox that I saw it again. There wasn't no saints,
Mhm.
so that's where it is. And that's how one of the ways you can see that Orthodoxy is the truth is because the sort of saints that they produce aren't just the Mother Teresa's or the John Paul II's, very good moral people that do very good things. They're on a different level.
Mhm.
They're on the level of the glory coming back upon man. And some people see it in them sometimes.
Mhm.
But anyhow, guess we're getting towards the end of our time here.
That's right. Yeah, that's probably a good place to stop. Um, so we will continue kind of marching through these different moral topics when we meet again. But thanks for joining me this evening, Gary, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very good. Very good
Uh,
time.
all right. Have a good night,
Uh,
Gary.
yeah, me too. Bye.
Bye bye.